This is the Capella, Singapore, a 112-room luxury hotel set to be the scene of an unprecedented meeting between Kim Jong-un, leader of North Korea, and Donald Trump, president of the United States. He has just arrived on site at the hotel on Sentosa Island in Singapore. I'm Andrew Chang. This is The National. We are watching this summit set to unfold before our very eyes. Kim Jong-un already arrived on site, and the two leaders of two countries who have so openly antagonized each other over the decades set to shake hands, sit down, and talk. Donald Trump, of course, fresh off of attacking trade deals with the U.S.'s closest allies, attempting to forge a peace deal with one of the country's most bitter enemies. It's just after 9 a.m. in Singapore on Tuesday, and we are waiting for that historic moment to happen. The handshake, the photo op, and details will matter. Neither side will want to be surprised. Neither side will want to be caught off guard or embarrassed by what unfolds before the very world. All eyes on the two leaders. And think of all the things the two leaders will have to keep in mind as things progress today. Not just policy, not just context or next moves, but also for that moment where the world is watching, how to stand, how to smile, how to project, what to say, how to say it. Posture and power will be everything in these key moments. Again, we are just moments away from the two leaders meeting and sitting down to talk. So let's go live right now in Singapore. CBC's Asia correspondent Sasha Petrusik standing by. Sasha, can you explain the situation unfolding before us right now?
Well, Andrew, this city, Singapore, has been turned into a summit stage. This is where it's happening on an island, actually, just off of downtown Singapore. It is a beachside resort where the two leaders have arrived. The first moments this morning when I guess the curtain was raised, we saw Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, a man who was known not that long ago as simply a brutal dictator and something of a recluse. Instead, he has been arriving here as the smiling diplomat. He's been making the rounds here in Singapore. He's been getting cheers. His motorcade has been getting a lot of curious glances from people here in the city, and he's going to be meeting with Donald Trump, who has his own style and is also someone that everybody has been trying to get a glimpse of here. He's been in the city as well. The two of them are getting ready for this really historic meeting that no one would have expected just a few months ago.
And Sasha, you talk about Donald Trump's style. I mean, one thing that was noteworthy as we think about the preparation that's gone into this meeting. I mean, Donald Trump himself said that he didn't have to prepare a whole lot, that he was going to be feeling out his meeting with Kim Jong-un. And just in the hours leading up to this meeting, Donald Trump was on Twitter.
That's right. He wasn't, whatever preparing he was doing was with one eye on Twitter. He sent out a message to, as he addressed it, to the haters and losers. He said that they have been looking forward to a major loss for the United States in this meeting, that they're looking for him to fail. He's vowing that that's not going to happen, that they've got it wrong right from the beginning. As he says, we will be fine. He's been very optimistic about this meeting. But it really does boil down to a very personal kind of diplomacy. These two men will be meeting alone. After the handshake, they'll go in and meet alone for some 45 minutes with only their interpreters at their sides.
And Sasha, I'm just going to jump in right now because at this moment we are seeing the two leaders shake hands, all eyes on them. Let's just listen in. So there you have it, a brief meeting, but all eyes on every aspect of those two leaders, how they carry themselves. You can see it was a warm greeting, both leaders shedding hints of a smile, but neither willing to appear too enthusiastic, too exuberant about the meeting that is to come. There will be hours of talks, one-on-one talks between President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. There will be an expanded meeting where some key staff members will be joining them for those talks. There will be a working lunch. There will be lots to discuss today. But once again, this is that historic moment where two countries that have been each other's most bitter rivals for decades and decades, who have not been able to surmount the divisions between them, coming together here today in Singapore on Sentosa Island. That this meeting has happened at all is extraordinary. Summits like this rarely come together so quickly. Sasha, I mean, you know, in terms of international diplomacy, this is the equivalent of a speed date, but that also, it came together under such fiery rhetoric. I mean, the conditions were extraordinary too. I mean, you just remember Little Rocket Man. That was just months ago.
That's right, and you know, they almost were daring each other to meet and to have this moment that we have just seen. Certainly, there isn't any of the warmth that we saw between Kim Jong-un and the president of South Korea just a few weeks ago, where they were hugging each other, where clearly there was more of a rapport. This is being kept a little more businesslike, at least at this point right now. But as I say, this is really a very personal, high-risk, high-stakes kind of diplomacy because, you know, this would normally happen after months, maybe years of preparations where all of the most contentious issues were resolved, where the two leaders were very close together and they could come out and declare some kind of a victory. That victory doesn't exist here yet. Over the past number of hours, teams from both the U.S. and North Korea have been meeting here in Singapore in a room trying to hash out many of the key issues, including the one at the center of this dispute, which is whether North Korea is going to denuclearize. Is it going to get rid of its nuclear missiles, which have been pointed at the United States and which Kim Jong-un just not that long ago was threatening to actually fire at the United States and destroy the country in a sea of flames, as the propaganda put it. So, you know, it's really quite extraordinary that they're meeting, but these two groups have not been able to hash out, from what we've been hearing, a common position. Denuclearization is something that both sides in very vague terms have agreed upon, but, you know, the U.S. thinks that means putting all of these missiles away, getting rid of them, getting rid of the entire nuclear missile program in North Korea, and doing that in a very complete and final way. North Korea is simply saying that they're committed to talking about denuclearization, but they certainly haven't been nearly that clear. And from what we heard from U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo yesterday, they still do not have an agreement on that. They're still very far apart. The question is whether these two men meeting together alone in a room can resolve that issue, or whether this is just simply going to be another step along the way.
Yeah, Sasha, the depth of the issues on the table staggering, as you mentioned: nuclear weapons, international security, wealth, economic well-being, all of those things in play. As you say, though, what's uncertain, we don't know how much ground each side is willing to give. And of course, alongside the talk of the issues, the two sides will also simply be sizing each other up. I mean, Trump has made it clear what his intentions are for this discussion. He wants to get a feel for whether he can trust Kim Jong-un and whether future talks will be productive, whether they'll bear fruit. But how do you build a relationship after decades of distrust? Let's listen in just to this moment, if we can hear what Trump and Kim Jong-un are saying.
Worked as obstacles on our way forward, but we overcame all of them, and we are here today.
That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This way. Thank you.
So a brief exchange, a brief opportunity to address the throngs of reporters who are there to take in every moment, every word. Again, the two leaders appearing quite cordial, quite friendly, shaking hands. Donald Trump giving his signature thumbs up, which is something that we have seen many times in the past. But this historic summit about to take place, just minutes away from the two leaders going behind closed doors and starting to hash things out. Here's a question, though. What does each side really want out of this summit? To talk about that, we have two guests here to take us through it. Mintaro Oba is a former U.S. State Department diplomat specializing in the Koreas. He joins us from Washington, D.C. And Tina Park is executive director of the Canadian Centre for the Responsibility to Protect. She joins us from Toronto. And hello to the both of you. So, Tina, we've seen all of this unfold just in the last few minutes. If I could just get your initial impressions, first of all, on what we saw.
Well, so far, so good. They moved ahead with the summit, and so far the personal dynamics between the two leaders seems to be going well. We have to wait and see how the dialogue unfolds when they're just head-to-head with each other, but we know that the United States is very much interested in reaching a deal on denuclearization with a very clear timeline so that they can get to complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. And from the North Korean perspective, they're also interested in reaching a deal so that they can gain concessions both on economic terms and also on security issues as well.
Right, and Mintaro, you know, on the deal itself, that is certainly something of substance. But I think from the North Korean perspective, much was made about just what we saw moments ago, the photo op leading up to this historic summit. And I'm curious to hear your point of view on what Kim Jong-un is really looking for out of this.
Well, you know, in a way, President Trump and Kim Jong-un have a lot in common. They are both masters of spectacle, and they both want to be seen as bold people who have accomplished major things. And I think there will be a lot of focus on the image. Now, what we saw just now was kind of a straightforward, awkward interaction. And it remains to be seen whether they will build some sort of rapport and come to agreement.
And can you separate, from Donald Trump's perspective, can you separate the man from the administration? For the folks who surround Donald Trump, what are they looking for here?
Well, President Trump and his administration come from very different outlooks. President Trump is fundamentally about his own personal image, and he wants to reinforce this idea that he's a great deal maker. That doesn't require a great substantive outcome. On the other hand, those below him, like National Security Advisor John Bolton and even Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, are looking for a lot more on this key question of denuclearization. And how they're going to bridge that gap today is the big question.
Tina, is there a way that this summit could go badly in your mind? Because I think of Trump's style. I mean, every face-to-face meeting that Trump has been a part of, it seems, as president, his strategy has been to go in guns blazing, fiery rhetoric, and then when it comes time to have the actual meeting, it's what we saw just moments ago, smiles and handshakes and thumbs up. What's your view of that?
Yes, you are right to point out that President Trump is rather unpredictable, but we also have to remember that he is very much interested in leaving the summit with a good deal, and he will do everything that he can to ensure that there is some form of agreement from the North Koreans on denuclearization. So we know that both leaders are very pragmatic when it comes to their own interests, and certainly it will not be an easy task in terms of getting a very clear timeline on denuclearization and some of the concessions that the United States would have to make. But I'm certainly hopeful that by getting together and having a frank discussion one-on-one, that they will get closer to reaching an agreement that will be good for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula.
And Mintaro, if we speculate a bit on what the two sides might talk about, but beyond that, how this might set the groundwork for the days and the weeks and the months and perhaps even the years to come. I mean, there are a lot of ways that this summit could end. How do you see things moving from here?
Well, you know, I think there is a decent chance that this summit is the beginning of a longer-term diplomatic process at lower levels to hash out these complicated issues of denuclearization at lower levels. I don't expect major substantive outcomes on this question of denuclearization, given the lack of progress we've seen among the negotiators in the last few days.
And you know, Mintaro, I think of another thing that we're used to seeing these things sort of unfold in reverse, right? The groundwork gets laid years in advance, and then the leaders of the two countries meet, that this is happening the other way around. Could this work?
Absolutely. I think too much has been made of the fact that summits usually start from the bottom up. This is what happens with established U.S. allies and partners with whom we have diplomatic relations at lower levels. With North Korea, a lot is done from the top down, and it makes sense to start from the top and set a broad mandate that career diplomats can then execute on.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Mintaro Oba and Tina Park, thanks so much for joining us. There will be lots more to talk about over the next few hours, certainly. But in the meantime, I want to take another live look at the Capella, Singapore. Right now, just after 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning, their local time. We are going to keep you posted over the next few hours as these bilateral talks continue. And as we await updates, also a live news conference from Donald Trump set to unfold at 4 a.m. Eastern Time. And Donald Trump tweeting from Singapore this hour. Some breaking news from back home. The U.S. president's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, has reportedly suffered a heart attack. Yesterday, in an interview on CNN, Kudlow accused Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of betraying the president for comments he made at the G7 summit. In a tweet tonight, Trump said Kudlow is recovering at a medical center in Maryland. And Rosemary, you have more on the fallout today from those extraordinary comments yesterday and Trump's tweets.
Yeah, that's how quickly a day goes by. So much happening in what you're covering. But along with those insults that the president threw at Justin Trudeau on Twitter, he also added a new threat to Canada, this time auto tariffs. It all led to a very public display of solidarity on Parliament Hill. And our Katie Simpson got some insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes.
Unity is rare in the House of Commons, reserved mostly for when the country faces moments of grave danger, times of war, a terror attack.
Oral questions, the Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Today, the trade dispute with the United States joined that list.
We are all Canadians first, and we will stand with Canadian workers and the families impacted by this escalating trade war.
While Canadians stand together, President Trump stands alone. Mr. Speaker, will the government work with all parties in this House to present a unified response to Trump?
Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
The gesture of respect was gratefully accepted.
We will always stand with Canadian workers and thank our colleagues opposite for their support.
Cross-party support may become crucial as Ottawa prepares for the worst-case scenario. Senior government sources tell CBC News officials are drawing up a list of ways for Canada to retaliate if Donald Trump follows through on his threat to impose new tariffs on Canada. The White House is considering additional 25% tariffs on imported vehicles on top of the tariffs already in place on steel and aluminum. Sources say one way Canada could fight back is by putting even more tariffs on more American goods.
President Trump can go off and have his tantrums and say what he wants. We shouldn't respond to it. I think it's beneath us.
Sources say the Prime Minister will now try to bring a level of professionalism back to the trade talks. But the open hostility is a point of embarrassment for some Americans.
I'm going to say one thing, Trump.
The day after his profane denouncement of the U.S. president, actor Robert De Niro was in Toronto with this message for Canadians.
I just want to make a note of apology for the idiotic behavior of my president.
Ottawa is not expecting any apologies from the White House. Canada's focus now will be to try to prevent any new tariffs from being imposed. The Foreign Affairs Minister will lead that effort when she heads to Washington later this week. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
It's not just Canadian officials and businesses worrying about this escalating trade dispute. Have a look at what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce sent out today. Basically, it's a big red flag. The number of U.S. jobs, it says, are at risk thanks to the Trump administration. Here's the first one, 624,000. That's how many American jobs could be lost if Trump does go ahead with those auto tariffs, again, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. 470,000, they say, the number of American jobs already under threat because of those steel and aluminum tariffs. Trump imposed those on most countries now, including Canada. And the big one, 1.8 million. That's how many jobs top U.S. business leaders say will be lost in the first year alone if Trump walks away from NAFTA. Okay, so if those numbers don't move Trump or worry anyone, maybe these images will. This map, it's been doing the rounds on social media, shows how many states rely most on Canada when it comes to importing goods. There's about 14 of them. And these are the states for which Canada is their #1 partner for exports. More than half of all U.S. states sell the bulk of what they sell to Canada. One Canadian who knows the president personally, former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Mulroney, as you probably remember, negotiated both the original Canada-U.S. free trade deal and NAFTA. And he's been advising the government this time round. I caught up with him today for his thoughts on the White House's attacks on Justin Trudeau. I know that the government called you yesterday for some advice, though, and you've been helping them. So it seems like things are deteriorating very quickly. So what kinds of things would you tell them to do?
Well, these are like serious summer squalls, and they come on you abruptly, and they dissipate just as quickly.
So you don't think it's serious?
I think it's serious, but because it's serious doesn't mean it's lethal. So I think we have a great relationship, and we've had it for 150 years, and I think that we'll have ups and downs like this, but things will improve.
But you know Mr. Trump pretty well. What's your sense of what sparked that?
I wasn't there, so I think you'd have to have been there to see the dynamics of it. I don't know. What I saw the Prime Minister Trudeau say was, I thought, fairly benign, and it certainly didn't warrant any attack, because all Mr. Trudeau was doing was, in a rather gentle way, was articulating the position of his government, which would be the position of any Canadian government in these circumstances. So I don't view it as lethal. I think these are things that come and go.
Would you advise them to refrain from responding in kind?
Our side?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
They're just not get engaged with him.
Well, we shouldn't engage on these things. You can't win that kind of a contest.
Do you think the retaliatory measures make sense?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Somebody in this business, somebody puts a tariff on your products, you put a tariff on theirs. Now, how it's received on the other side is something else, but that's life.
So do we just have to be patient then, or what? Like what? We just wait for him to come back?
No, I think that this will take its normal course. This is international negotiations, and they have their ebbs and flows, and this is an ebb.
But you would admit this is unlike anything you've seen before.
I've never seen language like this, least of all from subordinates of the president, directed at the prime minister of their greatest friend and ally. This I've never seen before, nor has anybody else.
Mulroney later told a small crowd at the event he was trying to get to when I bothered him that negotiating a free trade agreement with a protectionist administration is, quote, pretty tough. And he suggested Prime Minister Trudeau wait until after those talks in Singapore to give the president a call.
There was a moment of political compassion today in a situation that was growing more desperate. It was Spain saying yes, where Italy and Malta had said no. Spain agreed to take a ship packed with more than 600 migrants, each one rescued from the Mediterranean's deadly waters. As Margaret Evans explains, as the number of new arrivals grows, so does resentment within Europe.
Cries in the darkness on a journey that will already have been full of horrors.
Second line! More life jackets!
Rescuers struggling to see and bring to safety panicked souls in the water.
One by one, guys. You, in the rock. Go, 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 in the rock. Let's go.
This was one of 6 separate rescue operations off the coast of Libya over the weekend, according to those aboard the Aquarius, the rescue ship run by Doctors Without Borders and SOS Mediterranean. There is not enough room. More than 600 people on a vessel with a capacity for 500.
They are weak, tired, exhausted.
Go, go. It is a huge operation and one that takes its direction from the Maritime Coordination Center in Rome. But Italy's new rulers came to power, promising to put an end to the country's migrant crisis, and this was their opening salvo, refusing the Aquarius permission to dock. Malta, too, refused to take the ship, leaving it stuck at sea until Spain intervened.
It's a welcome development and a great display of solidarity from Spain with refugees.
But Italy's new interior minister saw it as a show of solidarity with Italy. He says he'll deport more migrants.
Ma il problema si è risolto.
The problem has been solved thanks to the generosity of the Spanish government, he's saying. The European Union cannot go on this way. Italy has become the main entry point for migrants crossing from North Africa to Europe. Rome resents its EU partners for refusing to share the burden. Aid agencies agree it's not fair, but say that can't trump a humanitarian response.
What we're calling for is the priority to be put on, the people on board and the people that are forced to make this sort of dangerous crossing in the first place.
And none of this addresses the question of what happens when the next boat is rescued, and the one after that, and the one after that.
Okay, guys, hello.
Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
So how dangerous is it to attempt to reach Europe this way? Well, the central Mediterranean is considered the deadliest migrant route in the world. More than 14,000 deaths have been recorded there since 2014. 2 years ago, 1 out of every 88 migrants attempting the crossing died. Last year, the odds worsened to 1 in 36. So far this year, 785 people have died, a number doomed to grow.
And still ahead tonight on The National, a raging fire in BC claims the lives of a parent and child and leaves 70 people out of their homes.
And a little later, a broken hip needs to be treated fast. Why doctors say waiting too long is putting lives at risk.
And as Donald Trump makes history tonight, the national documentary looks at the U.S. president's foreign policy.
I consider it, in the end, an honor, and it has been a liberating experience.
An honor?
Yes.
To be fired?
An honor to be let go by a president who has shown such contempt for professional diplomacy.
The island is very small, 1.5 miles long, a few hundred yards wide, approachable only by a small boat or a canoe. A large rock covered with scrubbed timber and salal lying off the southern tip of the Queen Charlotte Islands. And on the eastern side, protected by a promontory, stretching along the beach of a little bay, was the last large group of standing Haida totem poles, the remains of a deserted village, remembered as Nunstons, the name of the last chief, known for centuries to the Haidas as Squangwai, Red Cod Village. We came as guests, too, to honor the carvers in our own way, by taking what remained of their work to preserve it, and show the outside world something of the wonder of the old days. The next day we approached the village with a different purpose. The wonder of the pole still was there, but now we turned to the job we had come to do, to cut them down and take them from this place where they'd stood so long. This huge beaver was left intact and standing after the fire had burned the house behind it and eaten through the pole just above its head. Its back had been burned thin, and the wood was old and pulpy. A paper totem pole, Wilson called it. It was in a difficult position, so it had to be lowered onto its face. And a lot of careful planning and rigging went on before the few cuts needed to sever it from its base were made. It's hard to get used to the idea of handling a ton or two of wet, rotten wood as you would a piece of fine china, but it must be done that way till the sections are crated, and certainly works of art of this quality deserve no less.
I feel really great. We're going to have a great discussion, and I think tremendous success. We'll be tremendously successful. And it's my honor, and we will have a terrific relationship, I have no doubt.
U.S. President Donald Trump speaking just moments ago in Singapore, where he is now meeting face-to-face with the North Korean leader. We are watching this historic summit throughout the evening here on The National. And, of course, we'll keep you updated as the talks continue. Now, back here in Canada, in North Vancouver, a mother and son are dead following an overnight fire in an apartment complex. Some families were able to escape. About 70 residents got out, but their homes are destroyed. And as you'll hear from Briar Stewart, even those who made it out in time very nearly did not.
For those who woke up to the sounds of screams and sirens, one look at the fire confirmed just how bad it was.
I knew it was bad because it's terrifying. How would you get out that fast? It was so fast.
In the early morning hours, the fire quickly tore through this wood-framed townhouse complex, sending people running for their lives and trapping two inside. A mother and her young son died when they couldn't get out of the burning building. The father and older brother from that same family were able to escape by jumping from the second floor.
The dad's all burnt all over the shoulders and his feet, and he lost a few teeth. And his son, the oldest son, is safe, and he told me like how it happened.
Dorsa Pedrud and her mother know the family and spoke to them in the hospital. She says the father jumped off a balcony and the other son had tried to get his mother and young brother to go out the window with him, but in the end he jumped on his own toward a trampoline that was below. Moje Jenna Mabagi said the family had been living in the building for a few years and were originally from Iran.
She didn't jump out because of her son, she wants to take his son and coming out together, but the fire locked the door and everywhere, and she's stuck in the fire.
16 other people were sent to the hospital this morning and dozens are now homeless. Clothing and donations are being collected and distributed. Fire investigators are looking into how this building burned so quickly and will stay at the scene for at least a few more days. But the memories of what this neighborhood experienced this morning will last much longer.
It was all just so traumatic. I still can't get the image out of my head. We were at the hospital and any noise that I heard was my mind just went to it's the propane tank and windows exploding.
A terrible ordeal that's devastated this neighborhood and shattered a family. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
Up next on The National, why doctors now say a broken hip should be treated just as urgently as a heart attack.
First, though, as Donald Trump puts America first, where does that leave the rest of the world? Keith Bogue takes a closer look at Trump's foreign policy.
If the American president can so easily pull out of any agreement that previously committed the United States to anything, of what value is the signature of the President of the United States?
The Hudson's Bay Company founded Edmonton and just about every other city in the West in its quest for fur. But the centuries-old relationship with fur is ending. These are some of the last the Bay will sell. Not because of anti-fur protests, the company says, but because no one is buying.
Whether it's fashion-driven or otherwise, it's certainly not the business it used to be a decade ago.
But the powerful anti-fur lobby is claiming victory over the Bay's decision. Proof, it says, that a campaign to change Canadians' opinions about fur has worked.
Oh, well, we already knew it was going to work because of the way Europe has gone and the United States as well. It was just a matter of time because Canadians are more conservative.
The Hudson's Bay Company was created to buy beaver pelts from Canada's natives and ship them to market in Europe. The relationship endured into this century, with natives trading their pelts for food and dry goods at remote Hudson's Bay outlets. Author Peter C. Newman has written about the Bay's place in Canada's history.
It's the oldest company in the world, incidentally. And for them to withdraw from the last vestige of their genesis of the beginning, I find a little sad, because they're now just another department store.
It's also a loss for more than 100,000 Canadians like Bill Abercrombie, who still make a living from the fur trade.
Good catch, though. Never would have known what hit him.
The Hudson's Bay Company was Canada's largest fur retailer, and Abercrombie says an important symbol of the trade.
Yeah, sure it hurts. That makes it hard for a trapper to remain optimistic. to see 300 years of tradition go down the drain.
Others may disagree, but after 3 centuries, one of the original Canadian partnerships is coming to an end. Kevin Newman, CBC News, Edmonton.
The sewing machines are still humming. Fur coats are still being cut here in downtown Toronto. But news that Hudson's Bay is getting out of the fur business didn't warm any hearts on Spadina Avenue today.
The people in the fur industry are probably somewhat disappointed with the Bay's decision.
Fur prices have dropped by as much as 45% in the last 4 years alone. Furriers say it's a glut of pelts on the world market. They say it's the recession, and they say it's just a matter of time before the fur market picks up again.
As soon as the economy starts to turn around, the fur industry will prosper again, and the Hudson's Bay will lose out on that growth that we will all experience in the fur industry.
Furriers are trying to downplay the impact the anti-fur lobby is having on their business. The Canadian Fur Trade Association says 1 out of 4 Canadian women owns a fur jacket or a fur coat, and they say that's a higher proportion than ever before. But behind the tidy statistics and the lush fur pelts, there's been a grisly fight between the fur traders and the animal rights activists.
Say no to cruelty! Don't buy fur! Say no to cruelty! Don't buy fur!
Strident street protests and aggressive ad campaigns. The anti-fur lobby shocked viewers around the world with television ads like this one. Or poster ads like these that try to shame people out of wearing furs. The furriers have fought back with billboard and magazine ads like this one. Furriers like Harry Papadopoulos say animal rights activists have intimidated some fur wearers.
I think it's gotten our customers saying, geez, are these people going to come up to me? But it's also gotten a few of our customers to say, well, if they do come up to me, I'll take a good shot at them with my bag. And I'm sure a few of them have had a bag in the head.
Animal rights activists say the battle is far from over, but they're claiming this as a victory for their side.
Consumers don't want to buy fur, and I think that consumers don't want to buy fur because they know now what's involved in the production of a fur coat, and they're saying, no, we are not going to buy these products of pain.
Regina Hickel-Sabo, CBC News, Toronto.
Making sense of Donald Trump's foreign policy is an exercise in frustration, especially for diplomats whose wisdom he treats as worthless. Tonight, he embraces a despot. Days before, he lashed out at allies. It's becoming clear that putting America first comes with global stakes and one clear danger. The CBC's Keith Bogue examines how Trump could get in over his head.
We assembled here today are issuing a new decree to be heard in every city, in every foreign capital, and in every hall of power.
In the very first moments of his presidency, Donald Trump put the world on notice.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
In the broadest sense, every national leader has a responsibility to protect the interests of the country he or she leads. But Donald Trump seemed to be warning of more than that.
Every decision on trade, on taxes, on immigration, on foreign affairs will be made to benefit American workers and American families.
Within months, Trump made it clear he intended not only to defend America's interests, but to personally define America's interests, and to do so without regard for foreign policy expertise and advice or for the complexity of international relations.
All of us were shocked when we heard that statement made, and he basically said, and I think the direct quote was, "I'm the only one who matters."
The one that matters is me. I'm the only one that matters, because when it comes to it, that's what the policy is going to be. You've seen that, you've seen it strongly.
The breathtaking quality of that, beyond the autocratic tendencies, l'état c'est moi, I am the state, beyond that, it reveals the extent of ignorance about how our democratic system works.
Nancy McEldowney, former U.S. ambassador to Bulgaria, former director of the Foreign Service Institute, is just one of a number of senior diplomats who've left the State Department because of Trump.
I will not be a part of what this president is trying to do.
She resigned from the State Department last year, as did former ambassador to Panama, John Feely.
And now that I'm retired and out of the service, I can say, as much as the underlying values and principles of much of this administration's foreign policy bother me, the amateurism bothers me quite a bit too.
The exodus from the State Department has not been entirely voluntary. Some of the most experienced diplomats have been forced out. Tom Countryman was Assistant Secretary of State for Nonproliferation. He has a deep understanding and support for the Iran nuclear deal. He was fired just days after Trump took office.
I consider it, in the end, an honor, and it has been a liberating experience.
An honor?
Yes.
To be fired?
An honor to be let go by a president who has shown such contempt for professional diplomacy. He wanted then, he wants now an amateur foreign policy, and that's what he's getting.
America's allies seem perplexed and uncertain about how to read Trump. The French have experimented with flattery and cajolery. When Emmanuel Macron visited Washington in April, both he and Trump seemed to bend over backwards for each other.
In fact, I'll get that little piece of dandruff for.
He came here and he did indeed flatter, and they had all of the pomp and circumstance of a marvelous state dinner.
This is this very special relationship.
The next day he went and gave a speech to the Congress of the United States for maybe a day or two. A number of folks around the world and analysts who thought, aha, he figured it out. As long as you flatter him personally, you can kind of get away with the other stuff.
But the specific thing Macron wanted was for Trump to agree to keep America in the multilateral agreement over Iran's nuclear program. But nothing Macron said appears to have mattered. He barely left the city when Trump made his decision.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
The U.S. didn't withdraw. It violated. The agreement doesn't say you can withdraw. It says you can respect the agreement or you can violate it. And this president chose to violate it.
A few days ago, Iran's supreme leader said he'd ordered an increase in uranium enrichment capacity in case Trump's decision led to the complete collapse of the nuclear agreement. As Trump's critics had predicted, his decision seems to have given a boost to the most reactionary forces in Iran. If a Trump doctrine is taking shape, it looks more like withdrawing the U.S. from the world than anything else. In 18 months, Trump has pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership and said he'll do the same with the Paris Climate Change Accord. He's declared he might pull out of NAFTA and begun reversing the U.S. opening to Cuba. His decision to impose tariffs on his allies in Europe and Canada is viewed by many, even in the U.S., as an outrage.
Hello, everybody.
His senior economic advisor warns that the U.S. might not respect the institutions of the global economy that the U.S. led the world in creating.
International multilateral organizations are not going to determine American policy.
All of that will confirm to Kim what Trump has said, that he is the only one who matters. He sets the policy, he is the deal maker and the deal breaker.
It will be hard for me to argue to any country on earth that they should sign a bilateral or a multilateral agreement with the United States. If the American president can so easily pull out of any agreement that previously committed the United States to anything, of what value is the signature of the President of the United States?
The President of the United States has as much information and expertise about the world available to him as anyone in the world. He has direct access to other world leaders, their thoughts and advice. It all comes with the job.
The Turks have a great sort of proverb, and it goes, the head that wears the crown grows smarter, meaning that as you take on responsibility, most people rise up to that responsibility and they become more judicious and more prudent. I believe what we're seeing with Donald Trump is the exact opposite. He's been very open about the fact that he doesn't read, He's not interested in history. He's not even getting the basic information that most presidents do through the intelligence briefings that are provided daily.
In fact, Trump said as recently as Thursday that he thought that attitude was more important than preparation for his meeting with Kim.
I think I'm very well prepared. I don't think I have to prepare very much. It's about attitude. It's about willingness to get things done. But I think I've been preparing for the summit for a long time, as has the other side. I think they've been preparing for a long time also. So this isn't a question of preparation. It's a question of whether or not people want it to happen, and we'll know that very quickly.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, only a month and a bit into his job, has been preparing, meeting with Kim, and making sure Kim understands what Trump will be looking for when they meet, what a real denuclearization agreement would mean.
When I spoke with him, I could not have been clearer about the scope of the verification work that would be required, all of the elements that would be necessary in order for America to understand that there had been real denuclearization.
But the president still has to be prepared for what's unknowable. When President Ronald Reagan met Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev at Reykjavik in 1986 to talk arms control,
I'm always optimistic.
Reagan expected to talk about arms reduction, but Gorbachev surprised him with a proposal to eliminate all nuclear weapons within 10 years. It didn't happen, possibly because Reagan was caught off guard. It was a lesson in how unpredictable leader-to-leader summits can be, a lesson learned by a young State Department staff member with Reagan, Nancy McEldowney.
There's always a surprise. There's always a twist. There's always something that you didn't think through, and you do have to think on your feet.
Trump's staunchest supporters have allowed themselves to believe that simply by meeting with Kim Jong-un, Trump has put himself in line for a Nobel Prize. A small group of House Republicans has nominated him for the honor, and Trump has not discouraged any of it. As Trump himself would say, we'll see what happens. It would be foolish to bet against it in these extraordinary times. Keith Bogue, CBC News, Washington.
That helped me understand the past few days. Just ahead, new research highlights a risk to seniors. There is a push to treat broken hips with the same urgency as a heart attack.
With a large bone broken, you can get a blood clot, you can get pneumonia, you can have a heart attack.
First, though, as we go to break, a look at an investigation you'll see here tomorrow night on The National.
The story begins with a plan to show you how easy it might be to break the law in the name of making a point.
You take my engine card?
Yes, we do.
Yeah,
That
okay.
look-alike Indian status cards are being passed off as the real thing to secure tax breaks. Merchants don't know the laws, so they'll take anything that's, being presented to them.
The Government of Canada does not recognize this card as being legitimate for tax exemptions, period.
Our card is not a tax card.
These are all fake cards, every single one of them.
The cards are one concern, those using them quite another, because many rely on DNA tests that raise questions of their own.
In any way, does this call into question the legitimacy in your mind of anyone in your membership?
No.
The card carriers, tomorrow on The National.
Anyone who thinks that a $50 or $100 ticket will actually cost them $50 or $100 is clearly a naive, a mark who needs to learn the rules of the game. Strictly speaking, scalping tickets above face value is illegal everywhere in Canada except BC. But about 100 scalpers busily ply their trade in Toronto without too much hassle from the law, as long as they're not too brazen about it. So it's like one big open-air bazaar out there before game time, with scalpers buying from season ticket holders who can't use their tickets and selling for whatever they think they can get. And one veteran scalper, Glenn, no last names please, says he still gets a kick out of the cut and thrust of the marketplace.
I love it. It's more of it's a rush. It's an adrenaline rush.
What's the adrenaline rush of scalping? Explain
It's
this
fun.
to
It's
me.
fun taking money from people. You don't understand that. It's just it's a rush. It's like a gambler. If you see a gambler at a racetrack, it's like you're cashing in.
It's not a low-level bother for us. It's a major customer service issue.
You'd think scalpers would be just a minor league irritation to Ticketmaster's Tom Worrell.
Hi, this is Ticketmaster. My name is Joseph. How can I help you?
Ticketmaster provides box office service to just about every major venue in Canada, usually charging $6 or $7 above the face price. And it's constantly jousting with scalpers and ticket brokers to keep the best seats from their clutches.
We see disappointment from fans not getting access to tickets, not being able to buy tickets. We put in many different types of controls to make sure that tickets are distributed in a fair and equitable manner, that seats get into the hands of most of the customers. Scalpers, of course, are on the opposite end, and they're always trying to buy up as much inventory as they can. I can give you some examples. Outlets, for instance, the scalpers will hire homeless people. They'll go to the halfway houses. They'll rent buses and stack the lines at our outlets.
Why don't you get into a legal line of work?
It's illegal, but it's a bylaw, right? It's a technical thing, right? I don't see anything wrong with what I do. I'm providing a service. If I buy a stock for $5 and sell it 2 days later for $10, and I do that with 1 million shares, I'm a genius. If I buy 100 tickets and charge $10 more than what they're worth 2 days later, I'm a crook.
But so low level that most cops can't be bothered nailing them. The fine's rarely more than $100, and it's often hard to prove in court. Besides, scalpers will often sell below face price to some events, still making money because they bought way below face price. At Blue Jay games nowadays, you can often do better with scalpers than at the box office. As long as scalpers behave civilly, not always a given, cops will look the other way, except for one who has made scalpers his special mission. How long have you been chasing after scalpers?
I've been charging them since approximately 1990.
Lauren Bass knows he won't wipe them out, but that doesn't mean he has to abide their snubbing of the bylaw. The law is the law, no matter how inconsequential.
Researchers in Ontario are warning that current guidelines for hip fracture surgery can lead to dangerous complications, even an increased risk of dying. They're proposing changes they say could save many lives. Christine Birack explains why the risks are so great.
Excellent.
Excellent.
I can't complain.
For someone who just fractured her hip, Jerry Clark is feeling pretty good. She fell 5 days ago in a coffee shop.
I've made a terrible, terrible noise. I knew something had broken, that's for sure.
Clark underwent hip surgery just a few hours after arriving in hospital, making her one of the lucky ones. A new study has found 2/3 of patients in Ontario don't receive the urgent surgery within 24 hours, and that can have serious consequences. After a hip fracture, 35% of patients die within 1 year.
Because when you're waiting around with a large bone broken, you can get a blood clot, you can get pneumonia, you can have a heart attack. So these are the kinds of things that were happening, and they're not necessarily the result of the fracture, but the result of waiting around.
Canadian guidelines say patients should wait no longer than 48 hours.
This is the neck, this is the head.
The study author says changing that recommendation to 24 could save lives, and this cardiologist agrees.
To a large extent, it tends to be much older patients who don't have a strong voice, so they would typically wait longer.
At 90, Clark received hip surgery in less than 6 hours as part of an international study called Hip Attack. It treats these patients with the same urgency as someone who's had a heart attack, freeing up space and staff in the emergency room.
So we're trying to reverse this and see, okay, what if we actually really treat this like a heart attack or stroke, and we really quickly reverse this, can we then substantially improve the outcomes? Because the outcomes are terrible.
But Ontario researchers found wait times for hip surgery largely depend on which hospital you go to and how that emergency room and doctors prioritize patients in pain.
I'm very, very grateful that it was done so quickly. Yeah, absolutely.
It may have even saved her life. Christine Birack, CBC News, Hamilton, Ontario.
Remember, you can get more from The National every afternoon in your inbox. The National Today is our newsletter. We take you inside our journalism and then dive into some other stories that we find interesting. Today was India's deadly rumor mill, how fake stories on social media are triggering hysteria and claiming lives. Subscribe at cbcnews.ca/The National.
There has been a lot of books and reading materials which are being left for the urban waste. People were leaving them just aside the garbage bins. The first people who noticed that there was such a potential of reusing, reorganizing such kind of material, this idea came from our waste collection workers. We started collecting them and then the classification and this library idea emerged, and we are very happy with the results. Approximately we have 5,000 books, including the other reading materials such as magazines and periodicals as well, which has been collected in the last 6 months or so, and the numbers are increasing each day. All our workers, plus their families, in some cases, are being trained and educated. We have a space here which is limited. The rest of the books, we are going to classify them and to form other libraries within the city or eastern part of Turkey. We are going to reorganize or refurbish a garbage truck, which is going to be converted into a library, which will be a mobile one. And also at the same time, we are planning to collect the donations with this truck as well. As far as I know, this library is one of a kind in the world. And of course, our orchestra is also one of a kind. All those people who are performing are regular workers. They are using ordinary city waste collection equipment. Of course, they make some modifications to them as well to get the higher and the lower tones as well. We are using some other instruments as well, such as our national instrument, which we call it saz. It's a string instrument, but even this string instrument was found at the garbage, and they have modified it. And if we consider the real job that they are performing, which means collecting the municipal waste for 1 million population, it's a big number. And our garbage collection per night is approximately 1,350 tons. And at the same time, they have the ability to come up with new ideas each day. I'm very happy with them.
On The National tonight, we are keeping an eye on Singapore. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un have been meeting behind closed doors, and just moments ago, they came out onto the balcony, gave a little wave to the crowds. A historic summit, and we will be watching it all night on The National. Also, Donald Trump's former campaign chief, Paul Manafort, will be back in court on Friday on charges of witness tampering. At the same time, a hearing will be held over whether his bail conditions should be revoked, which means he could be sent to jail. The latest charges against Manafort were filed last week by special counsel Robert Mueller, who's in charge of the Russia investigation.
Well, President Trump and his advisors' recent comments about trade have put this strain on U.S.-Canada relations. Some Americans are actually finding reasons to thank us, which makes us feel good. The hashtag #ThanksCanada is trending on Twitter, has been all day. We reached out to some Americans, and their message is our moment.
Thanks for being such a great neighbor and such a great friend to us.
I'm so grateful for our northern brothers and sisters. Your sensibility, creativity, and genuine kindness is so much appreciated.
Thanks, Canada, for your majestic Canadian Rockies and how well you treat your visitors and take care of your beautiful country.
Thanks, Canada, for all the kids in the hall, for Leonard Cohen, Steve Eiserman.
Thanks, Canada, for dealing with our temper tantrums and loving us through it.
Thank you, Canada, for my grandfather, Francis O'Donnell, who was born in Edmonton, Alberta. And thank you also for poutine.
Thank you for being a great neighbor. We love you.
Well, you're welcome. So this really started when American music critic David Wild on Sunday was watching the sort of the fury on the Sunday morning talk shows about Trump and Trudeau. And a few hours after those shows, just decided to tweet out the suggestion that his American neighbors start thanking Canada, and a trending hashtag was born.
See, that was really nice to listen to. I was kind of hoping that the video would go on and on, because I heard thanks for Steve Eiserman, for Leonard Cohen, for the Rockies. I was thinking, what about thanks for poutine? Thanks for great bagels? I could have gone on and on, right?
You just wanted them to thank the things that you like, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a nice end to a very tense weekend. I'm not sure it's going to change anything, but we can revel in their admiration for us for 24 hours. Although that story's already like yesterday's news with everything that's happening now. Anyway, that's The National for June 11th. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.